In today's experiment, we discuss the challenging topic of race, how it relates to recent events, what race means, and statistical evidence of racial disparity. Thanks for listening.
All right. Welcome to the experiment, episode 4. So today we have a very not touchy topic, but I think we both think it's very relevant to what's going on in today's society. So in today's episode, we're actually going to be talking about race and the implications of what race is and what race does within society, how some people are more privileged than others. And then we'll look at some statistics, hopefully, just to kind of wrap it all up into a nice little bow. Nick?
Yep.
What's up?
What's up? Hello, everyone. Very excited to start this discussion. From my point of view, race has been something that I've talked about to those around me in personal discussions, something I've talked about with my parents and family members. And so it's always been a part of my life, being that I am myself biracial. And so I think this will be a very important discussion. And to something to add on to what Adonis was saying in the introduction, it is a relevant topic now. But the issue of race has never really gone away. And it won't go away after this season that we're in right now. So I think just putting it out there, as many other people are doing now, is very important. But I hope that it kind of is a lasting effect and not something that's just this little blip in time.
Agreed. I completely agree with you. And obviously, we're not talking. I mean, we will, delve into the specifics of kind of comparison between races and like what race experiences more oppression or more prejudice, and then so that's kind of what we'll go off. So just to start, considering the very unfortunate events that we're experiencing right now in America and kind of across the world, I guess. So Nick, actually, apparently, all 50 states have been involved in the protest. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, 15 states, and actually
50.
All 50. Sorry, 50, and then also 18 countries.
Right. Yeah. So apparently, this is the biggest protest in history, or something like that.
Right.
Like
most participation.
That's what I saw. Right. So that's profound. I would say that's pretty profound.
And so it's something we would never, ever see if it weren't for social media. Let's put that out there. There's just no way that anything like that would happen without the platform that social media offers.
Right. And that goes to show that, you see a lot of people not using their platform or thinking that they don't have a large platform. But the thing is, if enough people with a small platform come together to push a certain message, hopefully towards positivity, because I know there are some people, who push negative narratives, but we won't get into that. That's a different topic. So if enough small people come together and push a unified narrative for positivity and for, in this case, equality, I think it could, we see it now. We see it developing ground. We see it actually reaching out across the world. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important, when people say, I say it myself, I'm guilty of this, of saying, I wish I had a bigger platform. I feel like we could make a much larger effect, albeit true. But if enough small people come together and push a unified message, I think it's just as, if not more, effective.
Absolutely. Yep. Because I think the voice of a multitude of people will always be louder than one, regardless of the status of that one individual. I kind of want to go into now, like, the topic of race, being like, let's look at the origin of race. Why do we define people by their race, which I guess is a culmination of genetics, where they're from, and what they look like, their different features and things like that, why do we as humans find it necessary to define race, and what are the both positive and negative implications of doing such a thing?
So, all right, yeah, that's a good way to kind of get this started. So I don't know if you recall, I forgot which episode it was, but I think we touched on kind of people seeking to kind of identify with something. Like there's this like psychology about it, where people have like a very very strong yearning to kind of have excuse me, to kind of have an identity, to identify with a group of people. And I think that plays a role in what race is, although, you know, like science, hard science aside, like genetics, biology, and, you know, the geolocation of your birth aside, I think there's like a yearning that people want to identify with something. And so I think that's how race plays a huge role, because I feel like the world in general at this point has become a really big melting pot.
Mhm.
So, you know, there's a whole lot of interracial, you know, reproduction. So it's kind of hard to say, you know, I am this or I am that. Now you have people saying, well, my mom is this, my dad is that, my
Right.
grandfather's
Yeah.
this. And so I think that plays a big role. And in terms of race, it definitely, I believe race is an encompassing term.
Hmm.
I think culture has a big thing, a big role to play in race, right? Because if your culture does not differ from another person, then what really kind of separates you and that individual in terms of race, other than genetics, right?
Right.
Pretty much nothing. So.
Yeah, I mean, so to the point of you were talking about like a melting pot. I mean, like I said earlier, myself, I am biracial, and I know quite a few other people that are multiple ethnicities, races, whatever. And so it's interesting, kind of looking at the way that the world is going in terms of the idea of interracial reproduction and things like that. And I remember like reading it, not like when I was in high school or something, reading like this National Geographic article about how by some year, like 2500 or something, like everyone will look the same or something like that. So it's almost as if as we become more accepting, because I think, you know, race is kind of ingrained in us in that we look for similarities, right? If you look like me, I mean, if we're going back to like, um, you know, ancient peoples, you looked like me, you were probably part of my tribe, right? Or my group or whatever you want to call it. And so you were not a
Right.
threat. So now you see someone that looks different than you don't know them. You have to be wary of them. You have to question them. And I mean that you still see that today. They've done studies and shown that people are more accepting, and like even seeing like activity in the brain where it's different when they see someone that looks like them versus someone that doesn't look like them, right? So now if we're getting to a point where it's people are starting to blend and mix, and it's becoming unclear, you know, what race is what race, does that trait kind of go away too? And so now, for me personally, being biracial, I've, you know, I to everyone else, I look black, right? That's what I look like. When I look at my parents, one who is, you know, has all the traits of a sub-Saharan African, and then another who has a, you know, European look. My mom's white, my dad's black, or he's actually African American. Um, how does that how has that affected me? Well, when I see people, I mean, it's much, I think, a different view than someone that would be just a single race, in that they, you know, align themselves with the people that look like them. Well, me, I've been surrounded already by two different groups of people, so I don't really have that mindset. But what I'm saying is, does this issue of race, is it going to die out on its own? I'm not saying that it should not be addressed now. I think it's 100% important, because there's going to be multiple generations before that change does occur. But does it eventually go away because of this idea that as we all become connected through travel and social media and all these things, and people become more accepting of different ideas, these races will start to blend and mix, and then eventually, is there just one human race, even though it really should already be that way, regardless of the pigment of my skin, the size of my lips or nose or shape or whatever it is?
Right. I agree with you. Um, I believe that there's always going to be a subset of people that believe their race or ethnicity or whatever you want to call it is in some shape or form more superior than another. I think that's just the nature of who humans are, right? Like I feel humanity since its inception has been a very kind of warmongering and conquering species, right? If you look throughout our history, it's always been about one group of humans conquering another group of humans, right? Like, for example, Britain, they conquered half of the world for the most part. They felt that their bloodline or their nationality or their ethnicity was superior. So they felt that it was kind of their calling for whatever reason to conquer basically the world.
Right.
So I think there's always going to be a subset of individuals. Hopefully, it'll get much smaller as the years progress. But I think there's always going to be a subset of individuals that feel their race or their bloodline or their genes are um, more. How do I put this? Are better.
Mhm.
I guess that's the best way to put it. Are better than their neighbor.
Right. And
And so, yeah, go ahead. Go
oh,
ahead.
so I was just gonna say that ideology then has, I mean, if you look today, right now, that ideology has permeated through society. Like it's like if you drop a little drop of food coloring in a bowl of water and you just see it spread. And while that little drop is super, like let's say it's a blue, it's a very dark blue, and then it kind of fades into this light blue throughout the bowl of water, right? It's still there. That dye is still there, and so I think that's what's happened is that that ideology, which is old, super old, back during the days of colonialism, it still permeates through society, whether people who are deemed not racist know it or not. They might still be participating in activities or advocating for ideas or politicians or anything that kind of still projects that narrative that they are superior in some way or another. If you look, I mean, look at the United States today. There's reasons why 5% of the population is black, yet 40% are in prison. There's reasons why, I mean, we're going to go through all these different statistics. There's reasons why, if you just think for a second, just think black person, you think a individual who is less than the rest of the people, and like that's, I mean, I'm a black man, and I think that myself. I've been taught through the system that I've grown up in that I am less because of the color of my skin, which when you say it out loud sounds absolutely ridiculous, but this is the narrative that has been pushed on every single American from the day you're born. And so that you see how that idea from way back when in colonialism, when these guys were like, we're going to go conquer the world, because that's what people did back then. They conquered the world, and they had to have a reason and justification for doing so. Now we see the effects of that even to this day, 500, 600, however many years later.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think to go back on something you said, because I think it's very important. You said that when you see somebody, from the same tribe as you,
Mhm.
or in more modern times, somebody that's the same ethnicity or race as you, there is a how I always explain it is there's like an internal or subsurface connection that you have with this individual that you cannot really, it's not a really tangible thing that you can articulate in words, but there's like this certain understanding of who you two are as a race.
Right.
For example, in your case, if you see another African American or another black individual, you understand the struggle that your race as a whole has gone through that no other race in comparison to that has gone through.
Mhm.
In my case, when I see another Assyrian, I know how rare we are. I don't want to say rare. I know how almost extinct we are. I think there's about maybe 4 million of us worldwide.
Jeez.
Like there's like this understanding that like this person understands what it means to be Assyrian.
Mhm.
And in your case, this person understands what it means to be African American or black, right?
Right.
Or if there's, a Mexican, they understand that there's going to be a prejudice,
Mm-hmm.
that they're somehow, in some way, in some form, an illegal alien, even though they're not. But they understand that is the prejudice, and that is the label that has been placed on them, that no other race will understand but them.
Right.
So I think that's a very important thing I wanted to kind of go on. But yeah, go ahead. You were talking about. Did you want to get into the statistics now, or you want to add some more points before we
Yeah, just
get
just
into
a
that?
little bit about what you're saying, and that uh, the understanding the struggle of someone that
Right,
looks
right.
like you, because we talked about before how like there's someone that looks like you will say they're part of your tribe, and you believe that they're there for you, or a part of, they're more likely to be for you and not against you, right? So I think that idea that if you identify as a certain, or you are a certain race, and that you understand that people within that race or group or ethnicity have the same struggles as you, it needs to be more than that, right? It needs to be other races need to understand the struggle, or the things that that race as a whole has gone through, in order to kind of bring every race to the same societal level. I need to understand that you, as an Assyrian, your people have gone through something that has caused your numbers, I guess, to diminish, and I need to understand your culture and respect it. Um, America as a whole needs to understand why Black people are in the position that they're in, and what needs to be done differently so that it changes, so that there's more equality. And then same with Mexicans and immigrants of all different races. The idea that these people are coming here for hope of a better life, and understanding the situation that they're coming from, not just saying we don't want you here because this is our land, but why are you coming here? What can we do to help? Can we aid your nation, and then can we make that a better place if we can't, don't have the capacity to help you out? Or do we make it easier for you to come here and have a better life? So going from I understand the struggle because I am your race, to I understand the struggle because I've learned about your race. I have educated myself. I've done the work and the homework to understand why your people as a whole are in the situation that they're in. That, I think, is very crucial into transcending into this next, I guess, level of society, and becoming more unified and more progressive, and able to produce more.
I agree. I really like that. But the question is, do people want to educate themselves? I don't think, like you said, I don't think this is going to be a one generation thing.
Oh
I think
no.
this is going to be a multi-generational thing. Because I feel when people try to deviate from what they know or what they're comfortable with, they are less likely to do it, because we've been pushing this narrative that, um, even if it hasn't been obvious, there has been subliminal, efforts to push narratives, to kind of destabilize races and things like that. And eventually, over the generations and over all these years, you know, we have come to say, like you said, right? Like, could you and I both agree that there's this narrative that blacks are less, right?
Right.
Even though they're not, but can we agree that that's like a narrative that has been
Oh,
pushed, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, right. So, because, like you said, it's been instilled in us, I think people have a difficulty. They're so comfortable with that narrative that they don't want to seek education. They
Right.
don't want to seek something that goes against what they know. And
Mhm.
I think that's very, that's something obviously very unfortunate. And I do believe, like I said, this is going to be like a multi-generational thing.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, to add to that, it's not just, it is what you're saying, but it's not just that they don't want to seek out what they are, something that'll make them uncomfortable. It's they don't want to admit that they're wrong, right? So you have people
Right,
that
exactly.
that believe that, Martin Luther King did all this work, was assassinated, and boom, everything's better. Right now, civil rights is over, and America's this great place where everyone has all these opportunities, and it's all good. Like everything's fine. And there's so many people, probably the majority that up until maybe this point, that thought that that's what happened, and that's what we're taught in school, right? Like you don't like get through the 1960s and read about civil rights and then keep reading about civil rights in history, right? It's done, like that's it. So now while all these systemic injustices and racism is still permeating through society, we're being told everything's good. So and people are like accepting that and believing it and telling others that that's the case. So now to go back and say, wait, we were actually wrong about this, that's going to be difficult because people hate admitting that they're wrong. Like I mean, even me,
I agree.
Even me as an individual, I don't like admitting when I'm wrong. So if that can relate to anyone else, then it's going to be difficult.
Right. I agree. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is that people don't want to learn, and they don't, and if they do learn, they will still somehow manipulate what they learned to fit their narratives. Be like, well, that's just one person that says that, or that's just one book that says that, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like people just, it's going to take a long time. And my biggest fear is, after, like with all this protesting and things like that, my biggest fear is that, within a few weeks, everything's going to go back to the way it was.
Oh, that's 100% my biggest fear as well. Yeah.
And let's admit it. There's a big chance that is probably what's going to happen, unfortunately. Yep. Because I just don't see something changing right now, especially with I don't want to get into politics, but with like the whole the president situation, mm-hmm. I just don't feel like it's whether he is or is not racist. That I don't want to get into that either. I'm not picking any sides. Whether or not he is or not, that is the narrative right now.
Right.
That is the narrative. The narrative is he is a racist, and there are people that follow him who are also racist. But that's getting political, and we're not a political podcast.
Just presenting facts.
Just presenting what we hear. You know what I mean? So, and I think that's it's going to go beyond. It could go beyond our lifetime. Like, we may not see change in our lifetime, and that's a very unfortunate thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I do hope that after these protests, something does actually come out of this, even if it's little. As long as if it's progress, I think we're headed in the right direction.
Right. And I mean, there's so much progress that can be made in, local jurisdictions and things like that, which is something I'm learning as this is occurring, is that there's so many things that you can do just within your community to act, to enact change, right? So you can write to your local officials, you can attend city council meetings, maybe not like right now due to COVID, but you can do all these things, make phone calls, write emails to like advocate for change on the local level. And then that has a direct impact on you and those around you, right? Like, voting for the president is, your vote is 1 in 330 million, right? So it's like, but you can go and make your voice heard at these different things. And I think that's a lot of people, like, that's something that a lot of people within our generation just don't do. Like, they just do not do it. And that's probably because of our shorter attention spans and the way we kind of view the world as being like this big thing where we have to be a part of the biggest thing that there is, which is voting for the president. But in reality, you can make these changes on a smaller scale. To your point, though, for it to kind of culminate into a mass change, a mass societal change where ideas are changing and stuff, that will take a long time, probably multiple generations. But we can do our best to start the change now, I think.
Right. I agree with you. And just to kind of take a step back and kind of point it more towards race, we're kind of going towards political stuff, low key. But I mean, that's just the nature of it, right?
Exactly.
Like once you start talking about these like civil things, once you start talking about race, then civil unrest comes into question, and then it opens up into politics, but
Mhm.
it's all right. Um, so my question to you is, how would you define race exactly?
That's a great question. How would I define race? I've been struggling with that the last few days just because I part of me wants to say we're all just the human race. Like that's what we are. We're a collection of humans, and that is our race, right? But uh, as you kind of look at these different cultures and these, there's beauty in the differences between us, and so maybe it is that we are different races because of not just the way we look, not just the color of our skin, not just our culture, but all of those combined can kind of, define a race. I don't think there's, clear cut lines that can be drawn to define race to that point. Like even within my family, I am a darker tone than my little brother is. I wouldn't say my little brother could pass as white, but he's more ethnically ambiguous, I would say, or racially ambiguous than I am. If I'm walking down the street, someone says that's a black man. When my little brother's walking down the street, they might not know. They might not know whether to define him as white or black or Latino or whatever they might pop into their head, right? So I think I don't, and then I also don't want to say that race is what you define it to be, right? Because if you're a white person that's clearly white, that has never had any sub-Saharan African genealogy, then and you then say I define myself as black, you're going to get some backlash for that, right? So, but
Oh
but
yeah.
there's no like clearly in my opinion, there's no clearly defined race. Like this is what race is. I think it kind of depends on the individual, but yeah. What do you think?
So I guess the better question I should have asked you, what do you think race is scientifically? Because that's kind of where I'm going to go off on, and then you can put your input. So how I see race, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you said, but how I see race is, I think there's a lot of factors. Like I said, I think race in general is kind of like an encompassing term. So how I see it is, I believe culture plays a big role. I believe location of birth plays a big role. Um, your language, your linguistics, um, your religion. I think religion is actually a very very big thing in race.
Hmm.
And with that said, if you kind of put these all together, right? So for example, I'll just use Assyrians because that's the best I know, right? Because I am Assyrian, so that's the best example I can give.
Right.
Assyrians are mostly all Christians. There are some Catholics, but that's getting into the minutia, which we won't do. So there are Assyrians are mostly Christians. That's the connection, the correlation between the race and religion. Assyrians are born in the Middle East. Location. Assyrians speak a language that originated from the Middle East, and that's linguistics. So if you put all these things together, I think that's what fully defines a race. Aside from genetics, I think genetics kind of could fall under location, right? Because like when you look at somebody's genes, you find out where those genes trace back to, the location that they trace
Right.
back to. And I mean, scientifically, realistically, we all came from Africa,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's like the origin of mankind, I guess. And so I think those play a big role in what race as a whole is. Because if you take one out or you take two out, I think kind of that's when it, like you said, it becomes racially ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to take into consideration all these different variables to really pin down what race is. So if you wanted to add something onto that, you can more than welcome to.
I mean, I guess like just a question I would pose is because you're talking about, language, religion, and location, right? So you have Black Americans, right? Americans whose ancestors were slaves that were brought here from Africa, and then you have Africans who are in Africa now, are they the same race? Right? They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same religion for the most part. There's some African countries that are, I would say most Black Americans are probably Christian, a majority, if they are religious at all. And then in Africa, there's different religions. There's some Africans that are Christian because of colonialism and things like that. But for let's just say for the most part, they don't have the same religion, and then they don't. Did I say they don't speak the same language already?
Yeah, you did.
So, are they the same race? That's I don't know.
Good question. So is it okay? So let me ask you this: is this assuming that they've only reproduced with African Americans?
What do you like? Who? Black Americans or?
So black. So is this assuming that Black Americans only reproduced with Black Americans?
Yeah. See, I don't know. I mean, let's say that they've only reproduced with descendants of slaves. So it's just been within that group of people.
Within themselves.
Right.
Okay.
So then in that case, technically their genome would say, oh, they're the same, right? Or they're like the same race. But their story and their language and their culture and everything else pretty much would say that they're not the same race. So it's interesting how the circumstances can play a role. And that's why I think it's really hard to define race, because it's so there's so many different variables.
That's actually a good point. I was thinking about that right now. So this kind of actually goes back to the whole location thing, because let's look at this from a timeline, right? So we'll see the intermingling of Africans in Africa, right? Reproducing, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Colonialism happens, and then the whole slave trade happens, and then we see a shift in reproduction in America. We'll see like a separation of that cluster, of that node that's in Africa. We see a shift, and it splits, and it goes, and then there's some in America, and then we'll start seeing the intermingling of that node in America, and then slowly, generation after generation, the connection between the American node and the African node breaks eventually, right? Like after certain generations, if you're not reproducing with somebody from Africa, then that connection breaks, because now there's no connection after let's say 5 generations or whatever.
Right.
So that kind of poses the question, now that I'm thinking about it, is race in general, is it I don't want to say adaptable, because that's the wrong word. I don't know, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? Does race adapt to the circumstance that it's currently in? So obviously there is no Assyria now. So are we still Assyrian after 10 generations, 20 generations?
Mm-hmm.
Are we still descendants of Assyrians, even though we are not in the location of where Assyria was? Are you guys still considered, I don't want to say African, are you considered fully African, as it should be the question, if you're only in America now? So I don't know, like that's a really interesting way to look at it. If the location changes, does that mean there is a big change for the race itself, or does one variable supersede another? For example, does culture supersede location? In this case, I believe culture does supersede location, because so long as you keep the culture and the roots of what you are, I think that supersedes almost everything. I would say it's like in line with like language. I'd say culture and language supersede every other variable. Right. Now that I'm thinking about it, what's your take?
Well, I actually kind of do agree. Okay, so I'm going to step back and then I'll address what you're saying about the culture and language. when we're talking about location, like you had said earlier, everyone started in Africa, right? And then their location shifted as the early humans migrated to different parts of the country. I mean, not the country, the world. And so I think location did play a big role in that initially. Um, and it still does, but once you establish a society in a location and that society grows and becomes unique and independent, then you can maybe define a race for that society, especially when certain traits are showing up and there's certain language being spoken in a culture that everyone participates in. And then I'll talk about language and culture. When you look at, so you're talking about Assyrians, right? You identify as Assyrian because of your culture, because of the language you speak, because of your religion, and all
Right.
Descendants of Assyrians have that identity, correct?
Right.
When you
Yeah.
look at Black Americans, they were stripped of all that when they were shipped over here on these slave ships. They were stripped. They were disorganized. It was a very very direct operation. I'll say these people that were participating in the slave trade knew to take people from different tribes, to disorganize people, to strip them of their last names or identities, beat them if they ever, practiced the religion of their home. If they spoke the language of their home, they were beaten. So it's like they were not allowed to maintain their identity. And so from that, I think you have people that look the same, but they don't have any other aspect of race that we've just discussed until they are freed. And now I think from that moment, because they're free and they're allowed to make their own decisions and develop their own culture, that's when we see the development of this new race that is Black Americans. And I think that's a way that we can kind of look at this specific example of race.
I agree. Yeah. I think that's a very a big point. If you remove an individual from everything that they know, and if you actively oppress the practice of what they know, that does, I believe, play a big role in changing the whole dynamic of that individual's race,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you take a group of people or you take a whole generation of people, you remove them from what they know, you actively oppress them from practicing what they know. After a few generations, what they were is pretty much non-existent
Right.
at that
It's
point,
unknown.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's unknown, exactly. So would you say that, to go back to your question, now I'm going to ask you your own question. Would you say that Black Americans are a completely different race now than African Americans?
After thinking about it through discussion, yes, I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. So, wow. This was never a perspective I would have seen had this discussion not happened. So I know we wanted to get into statistics. I don't know if is that something you still want to do, to just to
I
kind
think
of kind of
that'd be a good.
wrap it
Yeah,
up and put it. Yeah, yeah,
let's just
yeah.
wrap
Okay,
it up.
so
Spit out some statistics for those that are kind of questioning why all this is happening right now. And again, I say happening right now, as in people are realizing, and the curtain has been lifted on these injustices and things like that. But this hasn't stopped happening since the Emancipation Proclamation. Let's just put that out there. But we'll kind of just list some things and let you think about it.
okay, yeah, sounds good. So I guess I'll start just to kind of get us going. So the whole idea, we want to kind of, now that we've presented everybody with race and like given our opinions, we want to kind of wrap it up and kind of bring it together in what we're facing today. With the protesting and everything happening for the inequality of Black individuals here in America, there is a narrative that there is no racism, or there is no um, specific targeting of police officers towards a minority, in this case blacks. We'll actually we'll actually mention Latinos and things like that. But again, just a preface, these are statistics. We aren't making this up. We aren't trying to push a narrative. We just, Nick and we follow numbers, because again, numbers don't lie, people do. And so we are just following the numbers that we have in front of us. And everyone else, you are more than welcome to go do your own research. But I believe that where the numbers are from is a very neutral area. So Statista is actually a very big company that handles statistics and makes them visually pleasing, because a lot of people, so they see numbers, they fall asleep, me included. So they make them very visually appealing and easy to follow. So for the first one, there is a narrative that that shootings between whites and blacks, or any other race really, there is no disproportion. So on this graph, it's the Statista graph, Nick. I don't know if it's called. The title is "U.S. Police Shootings: Blacks Disproportionately Affected," and so they have been following this. And as of May 28 of 2020, since January 1st of 2015, it shows that blacks face 30 deaths per million in police shootings. And just to kind of create a comparison, whites face 12 deaths per million. Now, there's an important distinction here. There are more whites in America, obviously, than there are blacks. So there are technically more white deaths than there are blacks in America. But if you look at it per million, or per any number, really, blacks are disproportionately affected. So I think that's a very important distinction to make, because there is a narrative that people say, oh, well, more whites die than black people. Well, yes, because there are more whites. So the probability of a white person dying is a lot higher because there are more white people. But in the event of a shooting, black people are far more likely to die than a white individual in police shootings, according to this graph. So, Nick, if you wanted to, I don't know, we have a lot. We have a lot of data.
Yeah.
So it's up to you which one you want to tackle.
No, so I just wanted to just talking about this data. Someone might think, well, I just think there's situational discrepancies as well, because
Absolutely.
why there's 30 deaths per million of black people, 12 deaths per million of white people, so there's more total deaths of white people, right? But you have to also look at the situation. I mean, I can name just 3 off the top of my head: Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Philando Castile. These were widely publicized events where Stephon Clark, another one, those men should not have been killed in their arrest. Did they commit a crime or not? That's not the question. They should not have been murdered in that process. So this data doesn't even present the unjust deaths per million or some sort of data, because obviously that's determined in a court of law. But you have to think about that too. There's a reason why there's 30 deaths per million of black people, and there's a lot of situational things involved. And then, so someone might look at this data and be like, well, there's more deaths per million because black people commit more crime. That's also an incorrect statement. So is there more crime in the black community? Yes. The reason for that is systemic oppression, which you should learn more about. However, there's not even a correlation between police killing rates and violent crime rates. There is study I was reading, and it presents the data in a graphical format, and there's violent crime rates for different cities, and consistently there are higher killing rates, police killing rates, than violent crime rates. There's no correlation. And so that argument has been disproven in at least one study that I've seen. And so if that's a position that you hold, the study was done by Campaign Zero, or presented by Campaign Zero. If that's a study that you think, or an idea that you think, I would encourage you to read up on it. And again, violent crime is a result of the situations that these people are put in. They're not inherently worse, which would be a completely racist point of view. But it's more so that they don't have the opportunities, and so they result to violence. But even with that being said, there's no correlation between killing and violent crime, police killings and violent crime. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up.
Yeah. So yeah, I completely agree, because I think it is very important to look into why the shootings do occur. But as you said, this study, just to kind of make sure, you said that this study showed that there is little or no correlation between violence and police shootings. Is that, did I understand that correctly?
Right. So basically, it's not determined. So there's no, like, you can't make that, because that word "because" that makes that statement false. You can't say because there's more crime in that community, they are shot more. That there's no correlation there. There is just statistically higher police killings of Black people than white people, and it's not because of the violent crime rates. Basically, is what I'm saying.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because then at that point, you would just be assuming, like, oh, because there's more violence, then that must be why there. Yeah. That's a good point. Another narrative that I've seen, I'm sure you've seen it too, is okay, well, these Black men, they could be armed. So the police officer could have, feared for his life. Therefore, he shot and killed the perpetrator. Which, it's, sure, that's a fair argument, because if your life is in danger, you obviously want to neutralize the threat, right? Like in any case, if a lion is coming at you, you want to kill that lion before it kills you. Right. That's a fair argument. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at unarmed police killings, I have a graph here. The data is from January 2013 through December 2019. This graph shows that there is still a disproportion in Black deaths relative to white, which is unarmed. In the Phoenix Police Department, I believe the proportion between Black and white is relatively even. But if you look through pretty much every other major police agency, there is a disproportion. New York, there's a significant disproportion. Jacksonville, troubling. Chicago, yeah, exactly. So there's a big disproportion. So Black individuals are still dying disproportionately, even though they are unarmed, relative to white individuals. And so that is another narrative that I have seen being kind of pushed out. I'm sure you may have seen that too. And just to kind of capitalize on that, if we look at another graph, and the previous graph and the graph I'm about to discuss right now are from Mapping Police Violence. So mappingpoliceviolence.org, and the source is also U.S. Census from 2014. This says unarmed Black people were killed by police at 5 times the rate of unarmed white people in 2015. Jeez. And these are rates by per million. And as you see here, I don't know if you have the graph up, I do, yeah. But yeah, you could see the disproportion. I mean, it's pretty. There's less than one white individual per million that die, and there are more than 2 people, and less than 3 people per million that die for Black people. So, I mean,
unarmed.
The numbers don't lie. These are the numbers.
Right, and that's solely based on the perception of a Black individual. Like that's there's no other reason for that data, right? If that's a rate of per million people, like you can't put that on anything else. You can't put that on anything besides the mentality that is ingrained in all of us that blacks are subordinate or more violent or more aggressive or whatever, that makes them think, oh, they are going to hurt me, they are going to attack me. And so it's sad and kind of disgusting, honestly. um
Yeah.
I'm looking.
And one quick thing before we close this out, just one quick thing, just because you said what you just said. There was actually a study done, I believe it was in Stanford or Harvard, one of these really, really big universities. It was a psychological study. They showed a picture of, of a few people, kind of like mugshots. I think there was like a white individual, a Spanish individual, a black individual. I'm kind of going off the top of my head. I don't remember the exact details of this study. But whenever there was a question that was asked, it said which individual looks like they have committed a crime or are more likely to commit a crime. I'm sure you can guess which individual is picked.
Yes.
The black individual. so this goes back to exactly what you were saying. Like, you see this individual and you're like, oh, this person's gonna probably commit a crime just because of this narrative that's in the air around in America. So that's just something I wanted to point out, and then I'll let you say your piece too.
Yeah, no, I was looking at this data referring to I think the unarmed police killings, and you see Chicago, and there's not one killing of a white person by police. It's only Black and Latinx populations. And it's just, I think when you look at this, you can kind of see the cities where there's a very clear line drawn between the white and Black communities. In Chicago specifically, I know there's a huge talk of like gentrification and things like that. And it's surprising seeing that it's so clear that there's a prejudice against the people of color in Chicago. It's sad. So yeah, Chicago needs to step up their game with that.
I agree. Yeah.
Anyways, so I guess we can wrap this up. We're getting into near an hour here. I just want to say, race, as we've kind of discussed, is a very complex topic. I'm sure in this conversation we've said something that someone's going to disagree with, and they might be right. And that's just part of the discussion. But the key is to always have the discussion, to be willing to have the discussion about race. It is uncomfortable. It bothers people. Some people like to pretend that it's not there. It is so utterly important to have the discussion of race, respect each other's race, support each other's race. We talk about today, there's the movement of the difference between not a racist and anti-racist, right? The fight against racism. So this discussion was just something between two guys who wanted to talk about a relevant topic of race and what it means in our society, but it's so much more than that. Race needs to be something that we can openly talk about. It needs to become less taboo. And I think that we've kind of started that in this episode because this was an experiment.